Hello, welcome to BBC World News. In a dramatic about-turn from his previous comments about the coronavirus pandemic, President Trump has announced a ban on travel from European countries caught up in the outbreak, but not Britain nor the Republic of Ireland. The ban covers all countries within the Schengen zone, the group of 26 European nations with no border controls between them. It will last for 30 days. European diplomats say they had no advance warning of the move from the White House. In Italy, where the virus has killed more than 800 people, the government has ordered further drastic restrictions. All bars, restaurants and shops have been ordered to close for 2 weeks. In China, it looks better. The number of new cases has continued to fall, and the government in Beijing has announced that the epidemic there is now past its peak. There's more on all this later in the bulletin, but first let's go to the US. David Willis reports.
Criticised for downplaying the effects of the coronavirus, President Trump announced sweeping travel restrictions in a rare Oval Office address to the nation.
After consulting with our top government health professionals, I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days.
The restriction will apply to foreigners who visited one of 26 European countries in the 2 weeks prior to their arrival in the US. The UK is not included on that list. Trade will not be affected, the president tweeted later, but hundreds of thousands of travellers will be, and the announcement took many by surprise. The leader of the largest flight attendant union here called the restrictions outrageous and accused President Trump of destroying everything that makes our country great. There are now more than 1,000 cases of coronavirus here, and the illness has claimed the lives of more than 30 Americans. Appearing before a congressional committee, a member of the president's coronavirus task force conceded that many more could be affected.
So I can say we will see more cases and things will get worse than they are right now. How much worse we'll get will depend on our ability to do two things: to contain the influx of people who are infected coming from the outside, and the ability to contain and mitigate within our own country. Bottom line, it's going to get worse.
Even as the president spoke, the pandemic's ferocious rewriting of daily life here continued. The National Basketball Association announced it was suspending its season after a player tested positive for the virus. The Trump administration says travel restrictions on people from China and Iran helped slow the spread of the virus here, and that widening such restrictions could prove the answer. Yet many of those affected haven't been involved in overseas travel, and the backlog in testing makes discovering their numbers all the more difficult. David Willis, BBC News.
Well, the EU has been reacting to President Trump's sudden announcement of a travel ban. It's warned that economic disruption must be avoided. Let's get the latest from our correspondent Adam Fleming, who's in Brussels. Adam, how much of a surprise did this come as in the middle of the night?
Well, there was just the practicalities, the fact that Donald Trump's Oval Office address happened in the middle of the night in Europe, so people woke up to the news. One of the first people to wake up to it was Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, former Prime Minister of Belgium, who chairs the summits of EU leaders. And he tweeted very quickly saying that he would be assessing the situation throughout the day. Economic disruption must be avoided, he said. And then he said Europe is taking all necessary measures to contain the spread of the virus, limit the number of affected people and support research. I think that was him trying to appeal to Donald Trump and hit back at that suggestion from the American president that Europe had been too slow and too ineffective in trying to contain the virus. Then a short while ago we got a tweet, another one from Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, and she really didn't refer at all to what President Trump had said. I think her message was business as usual. She showed herself having a meeting with some of her fellow commissioners, one of them joining by video conference, talking about how Europe can continue to coordinate its response when it comes to things like its own borders, scientific research, and its own measures for containing the virus.
Adam, do we know what the specifics of this ban are? Do they relate to goods as well, or just people?
Well, the situation has developed since President Trump made his televised remarks, because at first he suggested it would affect not just people, but all trade between Europe and the United States. We now know that it will be European citizens of the Schengen states, so that's 26 countries who are in that passport-free area, and nationals of other countries who've been in the Schengen area in the last 14 days. So it doesn't mean that it will affect flights from the UK or Ireland or other non-Schengen countries in Europe like Cyprus or Bulgaria or Croatia, but it will affect British people who've been in the Schengen zone for the last 14 days. And it will kick in on Friday night from midnight US time. But I think the EU authorities are going to be looking for a lot of clarification about just what sort of categories of people will be affected and actually the small print of this announcement. And it'll be interesting to see what this means for the political response in the EU. Will it help the EU to work more cohesively and in a more coordinated way? Because they've struggled up till now, because actually health isn't a matter for the EU, it's still in the hands of national governments. Or will this go in the other direction and embolden those few European politicians we've seen who've been calling for a much tougher response at Europe's external borders with the rest of the world and those Schengen borders between the member states, which at the moment only really exist in theory?
And I remember yesterday, around this time, the Italian Prime Minister was speaking of the European Union potentially helping a member state so badly affected like Italy financially with what it's doing to deal with the crisis.
Yes, and the European Central Bank in Frankfurt will be having a press conference in the next couple of hours where they will talk about the European-wide financial response to this. Do we see more quantitative easing, so buying up government debt to create more liquidity in the economy? Are there more measures for businesses in particular sectors who are going to be really affected by this? And speaking to diplomats this morning, talking about the Trump travel ban, what does this mean for European airlines who are going to take a massive hit from this? And I think people are expecting to see a lot of measures very much along the same lines as the ones taken by the UK yesterday when the British Finance Minister Rishi Sunak announced British measures for supporting the British economy. We'll get more details from the European Central Bank in the next few hours. Also, we're going to get more details from the Spanish government about what their measures are going to take, because the number of cases in Spain are ramping up very, very quickly. And we expect tonight an address to the French people from Emmanuel Macron. Lots of people saying, is France the next country after Italy that will take really, really draconian measures?
Adam, thank you very much. Adam Fleming in Brussels. We'll be discussing what the Europeans are doing about this in more detail in this bulletin a little later. Now, Italy, we've been talking about Italy a bit there, waking up to its third day under lockdown. It remains the worst hit country in Europe. I asked our correspondent Sima Katecha in Rome how the situation was unfolding there.
Well, we were told yesterday that 827 people have now died across Italy from coronavirus. 600 or so of those cases are in the north of Italy, and more than 12,000 people have been infected. Now, the Prime Minister yesterday, Prime Minister Conte, said that more stringent measures were being put in place. Now, all shops across the country, apart from pharmacies and supermarkets, will be closed. If you look across the street, you can see there's a pharmacy there. That is open and going as per normal, but just behind here we have a food shop, just bring you round, which is also open, but the bar above it is closed. So as I say, more stringent measures have been put in place. Remember, Italy has 60 million people, and they're being told that they cannot move freely across the country without special permission. So a lot of people here saying that how can we carry on with our daily lives if our movement is being restricted? So there is a real sense of trepidation, frustration and anxiety as to how long this is going to go on for.
And there is virtually no traffic, just a few cars going along the street behind you. It seems very different to normal life in the capital.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, some streets are eerily quiet. You have got a few cars going past here because people do have to work. That's what I'm being told all the time. And Rome is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. And seeing it like this, it's sort of like you're in the middle of a film set. It's just really quiet. Speaking to a waitress yesterday, she was saying that she's never seen it like this before. So I think people are still every day trying to digest what's going on across this beautiful city see. I mean, the Vatican has been closed off to the public. So places like that are incredibly popular with people across the world today are being seen in a different setting, which, to be honest, is rather bizarre.
Sima Katecha a little bit earlier there in Rome. Now, the number of new cases has continued to fall in China. Just 15 newly confirmed cases in the last 24 hours. And that has led the government in Beijing to announce that the epidemic there is now past its peak. Take a listen.
All of the above-mentioned information indicates that the peak of the epidemic in China is over, and the overall epidemic situation is kept at a low level, and medical treatment will continue to be the top priority, and we should not slacken our efforts in the epidemic prevention and control.
Our correspondent Robin Brandt gave this update from Shanghai.
The news that the Chinese government and its officials believe the peak has been passed confirmed basically what we saw 2 days ago when President Xi Jinping himself went in person to Wuhan, the city at the very centre of this outbreak, the city that still remains cut off from the rest of China and the rest of the world. I mean, he was confident enough to go, both personally and in terms of the government's confidence that the virus and its spread is now very much under control. Now, in terms of Wuhan, we had some easing of restrictions announced there 24 hours ago. Today, further signs that this is not the end, but the beginning of the end, because some restrictions on industrial production and also travel in Hubei, the surrounding province, they are being eased in certain places as well. But remember, you still cannot leave the city of Wuhan and travel out. You cannot still leave the province of Hubei and travel out to the rest of China. So that's the situation as it stands at the moment. In terms of the numbers, well, look, for the first time since this outbreak, the number of new cases in Hubei itself, that is down to single digits, just 8. So there is a sense that we're heading to the day when the number of new cases in that province will reach 0. And that will be hugely symbolic and, of course, hugely welcome news, but we're not there yet.
Robin Brandt, well, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to signal a new phase in the UK's efforts to tackle the coronavirus crisis in the coming hours. A meeting of the so-called COBRA Emergency Committee is likely to agree that the virus can no longer be contained and that efforts should now focus on delaying the peak of the outbreak till the summer. There have been 8 deaths in Britain so far, 460 confirmed cases. Now let's look at some of the new lines in this fast developing story. Our reporter Catherine Stancheshin is here, and Catherine, there's an event that's going on that's normally getting a lot of attention, that the torch for the Olympics is being lit in ancient Olympia. What's happening in Greece right now?
Well, this is normally, of course, a hugely symbolic event, something that's attended by thousands and thousands of people. But Greece announced that it would have a 2-week ban on sporting events, on field trips, on large cultural events as well.
These are the live shots from ancient Olympia. So it's a very big event.
Absolutely, normally, but it means only 100 guests are actually attending the lighting of the Olympic flame for the 2020 Tokyo Games because of coronavirus. It's the first ceremony in more than 35 years to be held without spectators. And the mayor of Olympia actually wrote to the Olympic Committee and asked whether instead of this, it could actually be put off to later on in the year, because he thought that the danger of staging it in this way under a cloud of fear and concern will damage the greatness and prestige of the event. But that isn't what's happening. As you can see, it's going ahead. It marks the start of a 2-week relay until the Olympic handover, which takes place in Greece. Of course, there's still a lot of speculation about the Games themselves. We heard from the head of the British Olympic Association earlier this morning, Sir Hugh Robertson, that he doesn't expect any decision to be made on those Games yet. All the messages from Japan at the moment are that it's all going ahead as planned, that they're working towards it. But of course, it depends what happens, because you have to preserve the integrity of the competition as well. And if certain countries can't be there, and this is all still to be watched, there's still several months to go, of course.
So the beautiful ceremony we can see there taking place for the first time without spectators, Catherine. Now, there are other countries in Europe that are grappling with uncertainty. Spain is one of them.
Yes, so yesterday the Spanish government said that it wasn't going into any kind of lockdown plan in general. Today, the president of the Madrid region, Isabel Díaz Ayuso, said that the Spanish government is now considering locking down Madrid, the Spanish capital, as a measure to stem coronavirus. She's made that statement on local television. And we haven't heard any more as yet, but it seems that obviously it's very fast moving and that this has been developing in just the past hours, so that is now under consideration.
Right, so Spain's certainly on the radar now. Norway, just one word briefly about Norway, what's going on there today?
So the virus seems to be ramping up in Scandinavian countries as well. We've heard about Denmark, issues there. Norway is considering now whether to close down several airports as part of its efforts to curb the spread of the virus. We understand that there's going to be a meeting at 12 p.m. local time to decide whether or not Oslo's main airport will be affected, maybe one runway shutting, maybe other measures there as well. And the news comes as 212 new confirmed cases of coronavirus were reported by the Norwegian Institute of Public Health last night.
Catherine, thank you very much for rounding all of that up. Catherine Stancheshin, appreciate that.